You were told Viking leaders ruled through violence. That fear kept men in line, but fear didn't last, and power didn't come from force. It came from being watched and quietly abandoned when you failed. Power among the Vikings did not come from a crown. It came from people watching you and deciding slowly whether you were worth following. There was no throne waiting in the dark, no sacred bloodline that guaranteed command. Leadership had to be earned again and again, in full view of everyone who mattered. And the moment that trust slipped, the leader became just another man standing alone. This is where most people get it wrong. They imagine Viking kings as warlords who seized power through force. Men who shouted orders and were obeyed out of fear. But fear was unstable. It faded. And the Vikings knew that a leader held by fear would not survive the winter. What they respected was something colder: reputation. A Viking leader was chosen long before any words were spoken. Chosen through memory, through stories repeated at fires, through moments people remembered when things went badly and someone else stepped forward. Strength mattered, but strength alone was useless. A strong man who could not control himself was dangerous to his own people, and dangerous men were not followed. They were avoided. The Vikings watched how a man handled success, and more importantly, how he handled loss. Did he blame others? Did he withdraw? Did he break his word when it became inconvenient? These details were noticed, quietly, constantly, because leadership among the Vikings was never permanent. It was conditional. A chieftain, a jarl, even a king, ruled only as long as people believed he should. The moment that belief weakened, the structure collapsed without violence. Men stopped answering calls. Ships left without him. Decisions were made elsewhere. And this is where the system reveals its true pressure. Viking leaders were not elevated above the law. They stood inside it, exposed. Assemblies called things decided disputes. Free men gathered. Voices were heard. Accusations were spoken openly. And a leader stood there like everyone else, listening, knowing that judgment could turn. This wasn't democracy. It was something harsher. Public consensus enforced by memory and shame. A leader had to be generous, not because generosity was kind, but because it created obligation. Wealth hoarded was dangerous. Wealth shared bound people to you. Gifts were not charity. They were strategy. A ring placed on a wrist. A feast provided during a lean season. A promise kept when breaking it would have been easier. Each act built a quiet network of loyalty. Not loyalty to an office, loyalty to a person. And that loyalty was tested constantly. Raids were one test. Not just whether a leader could plan them, but whether he chose targets wisely, whether he brought people home alive, whether the risks felt worth the reward. A leader who returned rich but reckless would be remembered, and not kindly. Another test was silence. When conflict arose within the community, people watched who spoke last, who calmed the room, who didn't rush to punish. Violence was always available. Restraint was rarer. The man who could delay violence gained power without lifting a weapon. But this wasn't the worst part, because lineage still mattered. Just not in the way people assume. Being born into a powerful family opened doors. It gave you a platform. It made people listen longer before dismissing you. But it did not protect you. A weak son could not inherit strength. If a leader's heir lacked judgment, courage, or restraint, people did not follow him out of tradition. They followed someone else, quietly. This is why Viking sagas are filled with disputes between brothers, cousins, rivals who all had claims, but only one had support. Blood gave you an argument. It did not give you command. What followed was quieter. and worse. Leadership was also about knowing when not to lead. A man who pushed himself forward too aggressively was mistrusted. Ambition had to appear reluctant, almost accidental. Those who sought power openly were often passed over. The ideal leader was the one others insisted upon, the man who hesitated before speaking, who seemed burdened by responsibility rather than hungry for it. This created the illusion of inevitability, as if leadership had chosen him, and once chosen, he was trapped by it. Because every decision carried consequences that lasted longer than any victory. A poor judgment could echo for years. Feuds did not fade. They waited. A leader who mishandled one dispute could create enemies who watched silently until the right moment. And when that moment came, it was rarely dramatic. No coup, no rebellion, just absence. Ships that didn't arrive, warriors who didn't answer, allies who suddenly had other concerns. A leader without followers was already finished. This is where the myth of Viking brutality breaks down. Their system was not chaotic. It was controlled by social pressure so intense that it replaced constant violence. Most conflicts never reached a blade because reputation was always at stake. To lose reputation was to lose everything, and reputation was shaped by stories told by others. You could not control them. You could only influence them through consistent behavior over time. This meant leadership favored men who understood patience, who thought in seasons, not moments, who knew that survival was not about dominance, but balance. Even kings lived under this pressure. A king was not a god. He was a focal point, a negotiator between powerful families, a distributor of land and honor, a symbol people tolerated as long as he benefited them. Once he stopped doing that, his reign ended. Sometimes through exile, sometimes through assassination, often through something quieter, being ignored. And this is where the story turns. Because the Vikings didn't just choose leaders, they tested them endlessly. Every feast, every assembly, every winter of scarcity. Leadership was a performance with no final act. Even age did not protect you. An older leader who could no longer travel, negotiate, or inspire would feel his influence shrink. Younger men would step in. Decisions would bypass him, not out of disrespect, out of necessity. The Vikings valued usefulness over sentiment. Survival demanded it, and this shaped their world in ways we still misunderstand. There was no single path to leadership. Some rose through battle, others through trade, others through law and negotiation. The system allowed multiple kinds of strength, but it punished weakness without mercy. A leader could not hide behind walls, could not command from distance. He was present, visible, watched, always watched. And the most dangerous moment for a Viking leader was not defeat. It was complacency. The belief that loyalty had solidified, that reputation had stabilized, that power had become permanent. That belief was usually fatal, because someone else was always being observed, quietly building trust, proving reliability, waiting. And when the shift happened, it felt natural, almost obvious, as if it had always been meant to be this way. This is why Viking leadership feels so alien to us. It wasn't enforced by law alone, or violence, or blood. It was enforced by collective memory, a memory that did not forgive easily, and did not forget at all. To lead the Vikings was to live under constant evaluation, to be measured not by what you claimed, but by what others decided to remember about you. And when they stopped remembering you as a leader, you were done. Not with noise, but with silence.